Welcome to another episode of Soul Discovery with Kelly.
And Gilly,
Welcome. We are outside again, sitting on the deck. It's a beautiful sunny day. We were just saying,
it's been a little
yeah,
warm today too,
it's
actually,
very warm
which is
today. We were just saying the other day too how it felt like it went from sort of winterish spring to all of a sudden
summer.
summer. Like it's gonna be plus
It's gonna be
30 degrees in a couple
yeah,
of
it's gonna
days,
be
and we're
like
like, what?
33 above, 34 above in like
Mm-hmm.
in a few days. And it's just
Yeah,
like what? There was no spring.
yeah,
Again, there was no spring. It just kind of went from
yeah.
cold and damp and a little snowy to suddenly boom.
And everything seemed so gray, like the colors. We need a little rain, I think.
Yeah, rain.
But now the grass is green, the buds are coming out on the trees. It's quite lovely. We're sitting out here and there's a lot of bird song right now. So maybe I don't know if you can hear any
Red-winged
on
blackbird.
the track.
Red-winged blackbirds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, we have three ponds. It's
Yeah.
nice to hear them. It's nice to
So if you're liking our podcast, like, subscribe,
and share
share, and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or any other platform that you listen to it on
that you found us on.
so that people will be able to find our show. So, what are we talking about today? What are we talking
Today
about?
we are talking about shadow synergy.
Yes.
The synergistic realities of our primal self-defense mechanisms and how we are generally attracted to people who carry similar or parallel stories and patterns in themselves.
Yeah.
So all of you folks who like eHarmony,
Mm,
I want to think about that
mm.
because, well, you know,
Well, because there's a lot of things designed in this world to be shadow synergistic,
yep,
to keep the stories going, the stories of
exactly,
fear,
yep,
because we are born onto this plane with both shadow and light. And there's a whole movement. I've seen a lot, and you've seen a lot of posts about fake light workers.
yep,
How any light worker that's not really looking at their shadow isn't really a light worker because you have to do both. And you and I don't both believe that because we've done shadow work for such a long time.
yeah,
And a lot of the shadow work is really unraveling the stories and the patterns of, we've spoken about post-birth chi, which is everything you're born into with your family,
hmm
society,
hmm
you know, culturally.
And then I mean the thing about post-birth chi or even pre-birth chi is like the energy of the electronic bonds in your atoms is what that really refers to. So if you need a scientific term, uh, pre and post birth chi is all about quantum mechanics
Hmm.
and quantum entanglement, and also shadow synergy too, for that matter, because the energy of our primal survival instincts and the stories that they generate in order to protect us, you know, are really substantial. But because for the most part we've been taught that the 3D world, everything external and outside of us is what's important to track and keep track of. We're not so skilled at, well, for the most part, people are not
Hmm.
skilled, or you don't even have an idea that their primal instincts, their primal patterns are physically embedded in their body and need to be rewired in order for them to be happy.
Hmm.
Or that's the shadow and ego even exists. People don't get that. Oh, I just have thoughts in my head and then I go about my life. It's like, yeah, well, all of those thoughts come from somewhere.
Yeah, and what's running the show?
Yeah, what's running the show?
And
Exactly.
the unconscious, the subconscious is running the show.
Yep.
It's really telling your body how to feel, it's telling your body what to think. And until you make the subconscious, like the unconscious conscious,
Yep.
you don't even know that
No.
there's another part of you that's really running the show
Yeah.
and that you have so much more control over it than you think.
In psychology, it's called the id,
Hmm.
the primal motivation factors
Hmm.
of our personality,
Yeah.
that are influenced by our pre-birth uh, experiences, as in past lives or parallel live embodiments, and the energy that we're born into in this world. Our families, our parents' energy, the energy of the family, the energy of the history of the family, the culture that the family is from, the regional culture that you live in, the national culture that you live in, it all influences the patterns and the stories that we tell ourselves, which influence our id, which influence our primal instincts for survival in any given situation.
Hmm. We actually have a course on the online course platform that discusses all of the terminology, the id, the
Yep.
superego, the ego.
Yep.
We discuss all of that. So, and it's actually quite reasonable price.
Nice, yeah.
You take that,
Yeah.
and it's an hour long where we discuss all of these things. You have lifetime access to it,
Yep.
and we'll put the link in the description to, you know, go on to the platform, and you can learn all about that.
So in the makeup of a psychological profile, or in a person's psychological personality, we have the id, the ego, and the superego. And it's important to educate yourself. If you actually want to understand your own mental emotional evolution, never mind actually understanding the ramification, the benefits of understanding yourself spiritually from the super ego aspect of like your conscience, and how and why, like especially the why people want more or are looking for more or know that something is wrong. It's because deep down in their bone, they know in their heart that something is wrong, which is why people go on, you know, vision quests and spiritual awakening quests and all this other stuff, is because people realize that something is out of place and that they're not happy.
Hmm.
And, the stories that we tell ourselves are the illusion that the id creates in order to protect us from being unhappy. And people do not understand how they protect themselves from being unhappy, that they tell themselves stories.
Yeah.
And the topic that we're on today, the synergy of shadow, is basically about having stories in two people or in a group of people
Hmm.
that all have similarities, or that all have parallels, that all feed into the same type of belief structure, and that are unconscious,
Hmm.
that people are not aware of. A very basic, simple example is people's desire to be safe,
Hmm.
and how easily that is manipulated through
Yeah.
scarcity. In our modern day society, we have a global economy, and we have regional economies that are based on that global economy. And if you have enough power and enough influence, you can shape the global economy to make things scarce in one region,
Hmm.
that then cause people to be triggered with their scarcity issues.
Hmm.
Basic example, just economics is is really good for some of these examples. In a relationship, it is, when people believe in sort of the same sort of philosophical or political or spiritual story of how the world could be a better place, and how, people might like cats, and so they bond over cats,
Hmm.
and that's a synergy.
Hmm.
Preferences are usually a quiet indicator of elements in a person's personality that can uh, build into synergistic realities when they interact with other people.
Hmm.
People bonding over bread, for instance.
Yeah.
You're making some amazing sourdough bread, like the
Thanks.
um, yeah, that's like sourdough bread with just butter. Oh my goodness.
Well,
And
I
again,
learned it from my daughters, who
yeah,
own a bakery, by the way.
yeah.
Prairie Wolf Bakery. There, little plug for them.
And trauma is very interesting because there's a lot, finally, the last couple of decades, there's been more research going into understanding PTSD, uh, post-traumatic stress disorder, and things like autism and ADHD, and understanding how, from discovering how natural remedies actually benefit the human body, and that the stories that we have told ourselves about certain medical models might not actually be true,
Hmm.
but how there is a mass agreement in belief structures, in belief in a particular type of science,
Hmm.
or a particular type of story around the science, around the thing.
Hmm.
And this is normal human behavior. This is what humans do. They want to be safe. And in a relationship, I mean, one of the things that we're pretty good at is, well, we're definitely learning is how to share spaces of anger where
Yeah.
we both had stories where it's not safe to express anger.
Mhm.
It's not safe to be, emotional about something because
Mhm.
you get dumped on, or people like just literally will shut you down or attack you for being
Yeah.
emotional or having any kind of feeling.
Well, and anger is one emotion. You sent me a really good video the other day, which for the most part I agreed with what the person was saying, was that shadow is really uh present. The astral energy of shadow is really present
Yes.
in anger.
Yes.
And it's why people don't want to be angry, because anger is such a tricky emotion, and it's just an emotion that has information.
Yep.
It shows you where you're passionate about, it shows you where you might need to grieve or where you're sad. Usually, if you're angry about something, it's because you care about something really deeply,
Yep.
and you feel like there maybe hasn't been a need that's been met that makes you angry,
Exactly.
or you feel misunderstood, or you feel misheard.
Mhm.
But people will suppress anger so much because they cannot, we're not taught how to express it in a healthy way without projecting.
Yep.
Because when you project your anger at another person, there's energy that goes to the other person, triggers their shadow, gets them hooked into
Yep.
it. They feel they have to defend themselves. They project it back at you, and around it goes, and
Yep.
it doesn't stop.
Yeah, and that's the synergy.
And interestingly enough, because this was that kind of energy was an issue between my ex-husband and I. We were having a conversation the other day, and we both were able to talk about that. He said he had to learn about projection, that he learned what it meant to project and how he took on the projection of others.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, this is a
Wow.
conversation that I'm like, wow, I wish we would have known this a long time ago.
Wow.
Like
Yeah.
we both, but that was great because it's, yeah, about projection, because you don't know. You take on these stories and then you get triggered, and then it goes around and around. And it's not the right kind of astral energy, but stepping into observation of that shadow energy. Like on Monday, you weren't necessarily triggered. I was triggered though by you expressing yourself about something. And but you and I both step into observation of it,
Yeah.
where we can both feel that, oh yeah, we really want to go, but we actually have learned how to observe, and then we get quiet, and then somebody expresses it, and then we keep working through it, because it's actually the act of observing what your shadow is
Yep.
trying to do changes everything. That changes reality.
Yep.
But I find most people, and a lot of people that call themselves the, good high vibes only crowd or whatever, is that they don't want to look at shadow. They don't want to look that they even have one, and they think by not thinking about it or dealing with it or talking about it when they're triggered,
Yeah.
that, oh, I have it under control.
Yeah.
No, it's still running you, because that's your shadow telling you, don't look at me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't look at me.
Yeah.
I don't want you
Yeah.
to know what I'm doing over here. So you just focus on that high vibe thing that you're talking about and the love and light only. And I'm just going to keep running the show. And that's what's happening.
Yeah. The high vibes only crowd is a basically superficial coping mechanism for people denying what they're feeling, denying their shadow, denying their ego. People not wanting their bubble of stories to be burst
Hmm.
by reality. And again, it's a normal thing for humans to do, so seek the positive in the negative. But one of the things that's going on in just mainstream media, because some of this the spiritual jargon is becoming mainstream, where people think that if they utter the words and they're doing something.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing as like reading a book on a weekend and thinking you know something.
Hmm.
It's like you don't know anything until you have actually put it into practice, where you have wisdom, you have intellect and experience coming together to actually give you wisdom. The intellect based on the information that we read, or even the information from our experiences. When you have enough of the right kind of experiences, it'll actually turn into wisdom, not based in shadow stars, not based in the primal id of need to keep you safe. And that's essentially what the high vibes only crowd is
Mhm.
all about,
Yeah.
is the id rearing up and going, nope, we're not thinking about anything else. We're just going to be high vibes only and positive because that's all we can deal with.
Mhm.
And it is generally, as a rule of thumb, an indication of someone who has not done much real spiritual house cleaning,
Yeah.
has not looked at their primal instincts or their primal reactions that are the basis for being triggered.
Yeah. Yeah. We I mean, talk about shadow, you know, coming after us, that we were basically attacked from a group because we were expressing ourselves
Yeah,
and expressing ourselves
yeah.
in a direct manner. I've also been told that I'm not delicate, which in my communication, which I'm direct though, but people who have a hard time with directness are still hiding,
Yep. We're
and
so
it's hard to
fragile.
be called out.
Yep.
And um as a therapist, sure, I've learned different ways to communicate. So, but also I had to practice communication because I suppressed my communication for a long time because I didn't feel that my communication was always met with, the same energy. And also I hid a lot. It was like I didn't want to express myself because I didn't want I had a fear of exposure. I
Yep.
really didn't want to be attacked. I just wanted to feel safe.
Yep.
And so I didn't express myself. So in the process of learning how to express myself, like, yeah, it doesn't always come out right. The difference between learning, like, because I learned as soon as I said it, oh, I didn't really mean it that way. But if the other person gives you a chance to explain and you have real communication happening where they're not so triggered that they're going to
Hmm.
attack you back,
Yep.
that you can develop real communication, but it takes practice. And I was really rusty because it's not a skill that I really had with a lot of people. And it's something that I've been able to develop with you and then becoming a therapist.
Yep.
Well, you have to learn different ways to communicate.
Yep.
And I've been able to learn how to communicate with different people. And sometimes I'll say things because I can be very direct. And then if I see that it hasn't landed well with someone, I will apologize and explain further what I meant and, try to come to an understanding, because part of our healing is that our ego is going to get triggered. And we have to allow our ego to be triggered to see where we're actually holding on to things. But if we just react when our ego is triggered,
Yep.
then we're not actually seeing what we still have to heal, because a lot of times people are not trying to hurt us.
No,
Now,
they're just trying to communicate, but they're
yeah.
their own toolbox for communication.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm actually a trained communicator.
Hmm.
Public relations and marketing are my background. Worked in public policy for 30 years. Member of the International Association of Business Communicators, et cetera, et cetera. And even with all that, it's so very evident that people don't want to communicate for real.
Hmm.
They want their little bubble to stay intact, and they will do whatever it requires for their little bubble to stay intact and to not be disturbed. And this is, the whole thing about like advertising commercials. Like I find commercials fascinating because commercials are so incredibly precise and deliberate about manipulating people, specifically to sell people or get people to want things.
Right. Yeah.
And it's always an indication when you have a certain, this is one of the things for everyone listening who thinks that, TV is evil. TV is a symptom of our current culture on this planet.
Yeah.
It's not evil. TV is actually neutral.
It's just a thing.
What you let it do to you is your responsibility.
Right.
If you understand how to observe and step into observation and watch the patterns that it presents on the screen, is up to you. And if you understand how to watch for the patterns and to pick things apart to see the patterns of the archetypes of personalities presented, then it can be a profoundly educational tool. And it can teach you an awful lot about what's going on in the world and why, if you understand how to observe it.
It teaches you a lot about shadow.
And know a lot
Shadow
about
work,
shadow.
right? Because commercials are all, no matter how happy and fun and
Yep.
everything they are, they're designed to hook into one of your fears,
Yep.
which is that you don't have whiter teeth, or that you want to lose weight, or that you feel like
Acceptance,
you're not good
love,
enough,
loyalty,
acceptance,
all
love.
all the social stressors and
Yeah.
yep, yep,
And they're trying to sell you something and you're going to buy it because you're afraid
yep.
of something,
Have something.
small fear or not.
Yep.
And you're right. When you look at those things and you see the patterns, you can see what the collective subconscious, like the
Exactly.
collective shadow, is
Yep.
actually doing.
Yep.
And this is another thing you and I have talked about. I think we're going to talk about this more in a different podcast, but is that being born into this system, because it's what we are. When we're born here, we're separated from source. That's our original wound. And it's up to us to put it back together. But you have to see what our shadow's doing. Actually, use this as an example. The other night, we were doing a hypnotherapy session on me. You
Yep.
were doing it on me,
Yep.
and my shadow came out full force.
Oh boy.
And it was the most interesting thing because I then started having a conversation with it
Mhm.
because it kept saying to you, well, you don't remember things and you're not asking the right questions.
And now
And
I
it
was
wouldn't answer the questions because you were not asking the right questions that it wanted you to ask. And
mhm.
we haven't gone back into it again. But this is how, like, even after all the work that I've done, there is something that I need to let go of, that my shadow's like, haha,
No,
nope.
I'm still the king of the
Are you
castle.
sure about that? Because
Yeah.
I'm like, it wants to be in control. And that's just the thing. We always talk about collective consciousness, but it's actually collective shadow. You
Yep.
want to raise frequency and vibration on the planet, you have to understand what the collective shadow is doing.
Yeah. People think, oh yeah, we're interacting with the collective consciousness or the galactic consciousness or whatever. It's like until you've dealt with your own shadow, until you've dealt with your fears, your fear of death, your fear of whatever it is that your id constantly is pulling, the rabbit out of its hat to throw at you, to keep you triggered, to keep you going, spinning your wheels until you've actually dealt with your shadow and understand how to listen in your bones to all the subtle impacts and manipulations of feeling and mental information that your shadow throws at you, then no, you're not interacting with the global consciousness. You're interacting with the global shadow.
Hmm.
You're interacting with the galactic shadow. You're interacting, like, that's the thing. That is what filters your reality, which, and people don't want to accept it. They just want to have a happy life, which is perfectly fine, which is perfectly okay, perfectly normal. They want to have just just be happy.
Well, and you can be happy
Yep.
and still look at your shadow and still acknowledge that it's there
Yep.
and that it's really there as a tool. Because if you come here, the way I see it, the way I feel it, and I feel like we have a very similar perspective in this, is that when you're born here and you've agreed to come here with your soul contract and everything, and you've agreed to not only embody light but shadow,
Yep.
then you have taken an agreement that you are here to learn about what shadow is capable of.
Yep.
So ignoring it isn't doing you any good, and
No,
it's
it
not
never
doing
does.
anyone else
That's
any good, and
that's right.
it really doesn't.
It's like basically setting the house on fire and deciding to sit down and have breakfast and cook yourself,
Like that little dog
like that
meme where
little
it's all
dog
stuck
meme.
in,
Think
it's fine.
it's fine, everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
Sitting in a second. That's the whole thing about shadow and why people, also, it's the whole thing of like why bad things, quote unquote, happen to quote unquote good people. Is because even good people have fears.
Hmm.
And if they haven't looked at them, they will create a huge blind spot in people's realities or in their sensitivities or sensibilities about things around them. And they'll,
Well, and going back to relationships in shadow, is that it's why a lot of relationships can fail too,
oh yeah,
is because your shadows are, and then if one of you grows, like your shadows are compatible,
yep,
your stories are compatible because you bond over things.
yep,
So sometimes you can bond with somebody over trauma,
oh yeah, no, absolutely,
and which is, a common thing, and you can talk about it with someone. But when one person moves out of the trauma space and actually heals the trauma space and the other person doesn't,
yep,
that's where you've got a conflict then. Because now you're not
Mm.
shadow synergistic anymore because you're starting to look at it.
And when you step out of or don't even engage in the shadow games or the stories and the games provided by our primal instincts to stay keep ourselves safe, when we don't engage in someone else's story about all of that, when that person is in shadow, when they have a lot of stories that are about guilt and shame and embarrassment and not taking responsibility,
Mhm.
it'll cause friction.
Mhm.
It'll cause all of the nonverbal friction you can imagine, simply because if a person has a different belief system and a different perspective on reality, and someone keeps trying to hook them into their drama, keep them hooked into their pity party or their victim mentality, and you don't, that person's shadow will clue in and will begin to hate you,
Mhm.
and then try and cause you all sorts of grief,
Yeah.
or manipulate the environment, the situation, or whatever to cause you grief,
Mhm.
or to control
Yeah.
things, to control your reality in a way that benefits them or makes them feel like they're in control.
Mhm.
Because when shadow encounters somebody that doesn't play the shadow game, that does not fit into their stories,
Mhm.
shadow gets exceptionally defensive and exceptionally aggressive
Yeah.
because it doesn't know what to do. So it
Mhm.
goes on the offensive
Mhm.
and the defensive at the same time. Just like the quiet manipulation is basically like,
Well, and somebody else who enjoys drama or enjoys sort of creating drama can create drama with you. And then when you call them out on it, they'll sit and talk to you about it, and you feel like you're getting somewhere with it because, oh, this person's listening to me and they're going to change their behavior. But the subtle thing is that they don't, because then they'll find another way to poke at you. And then you'll go and talk to them again, and that's where they feed on it. That's how their shadow feeds on it. Because then it's like, oh, well, now this person is spending all this time talking to me, and I have their time and I have their energy.
yep,
And because I did this, and
mhm,
okay, I'm not going to do that again because they're going to catch me
yep,
on it.
yeah,
I'm going to
exactly.
find
Just
something
yes,
else. And I keep
exactly,
finding something else.
exactly.
And so this is how somebody can think that they're in a good relationship, but you have to watch how many times this person is causing you drama, because it's not going, the pattern is the drama,
Yep.
but it's not going to be the same thing.
Shadow synergy is very much like a narcissistic relationship.
Mm,
The gaslighting, the
mm-hmm.
stories
Yeah.
to convince you that you're wrong, to cause doubt,
Mm-hmm.
to disrupts your life
Mm-hmm.
because of the drama, because of the exponential need to expend energy
Mm-hmm.
to keep yourself from falling into a shadow story or falling prey to someone's manipulation of your um, life,
Mm-hmm.
telling, lying, hiding things, um, or staying unconscious. And sometimes it is completely unconscious
Yeah.
and not deliberate. And I mean, most of the time it is until people actually like wake up and realize that there's a pattern.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. It's to realize that you have a shadow
Yep,
and to start looking at it and
yep,
observing it. And it's not that anyone is judging you if you don't know that you have it. It is unconscious until
yep,
you're aware of it.
yep,
Completely unconscious. And it usually starts because you see patterns of behavior in yourself that you want to change and you
yep,
don't like it. And then you start to notice patterns in your relationships and you don't like those.
yep.
And then it just kind of, grows from there, that you look at different things. And, you and I do, we talk about shadow a lot. For the most part, it's not that we don't think we have one because we do.
Oh yeah, no, we know. Yeah, yeah. It's just um, it's like riding a bike,
Hmm.
right? It's like you start off with a tricycle
But yeah.
when you're a kid, like, or pushing the tricycle
Hmm.
around when you're a kid, when you're so young and you're not strong enough to actually move it yourself, and then you get on the tricycle and you're able to move it yourself, and then you're happy and you have elation, and then when you graduate to a normal bike with training wheels, it gets a little scary, and but you have the muscle memory, so you keep pushing through and you learn how to do that, and you keep upgrading your ability to move forward.
Yeah.
When you are working and doing shadow work, and when you're working with the spaces of observation and stillness inside the mind, inside the body, It takes practice,
Mhm.
like everything else. Doesn't matter who you are. Even if you're an ascended master, you still need to deal with 3D, and you still need to do with
Right.
still need to deal with what you have been born into,
Yeah.
the culture you've been born into. The like, it doesn't matter who you are, because that's the illusion. Doesn't matter who you were in a past life. You're here now. You're in the middle of your own illusion. How are you aware of it? Are you
Mhm.
even aware of it?
Yeah.
What are you doing with your mind? Are you letting the id run the show, or are you actually striving to connect with your super ego and your conscience and your higher self,
Mhm.
and to step beyond all of the conditioning that keeps you trapped
Mhm.
in a false sense
Yeah.
of control?
Well, because families in particular, when you step out into observation of your own shadow and you start changing patterns, people who are not tend to want to
Yep.
keep you in the box you were in, want to
Yep.
pull you back into the story or into their story because that's where they're comfortable with you being.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of strength. And sometimes you need to step back. Like I did a Facebook and Instagram post today
That was a
talking
really
about.
good post, by the way.
Oh, thank you. About how comfortable are you just being with yourself?
Yep.
Because there's so much in the world that convinces us that we need a tribe. We need to have a group of people that understands us. And if it's not our family, then we have to go find something else because we need support. And well, of course,
Mhm.
we all need support from time to time. But how comfortable are you just sitting with yourself? How comfortable are you seeing your own shadow? Or do you fill your life with all of these things so you don't actually have to be alone with yourself?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, everyone loves Zen and loves using Zen quotes and all this, but I find very few people these days are. I mean, I haven't read any good books on Zen Buddhism in a long time. The last 10 years was mostly taken up taking care of my dad, so I didn't really have time to be out in the bookstores the way I used to be, hunting down the next good book on it.
Well, maybe that'll be back in your new phase of life.
Yeah, but Zen Buddhism is essentially the direct pointing at the mind without all the externalizations, and this is like it's just directly pointing at your mind, the habits, the patterns, the stories, and realizing that they're all fake and that they're all illusions. They're all based on your experiences, which are based on your primal instincts of your id to be safe. And the stories and everything like that that we tell ourselves, like the only way that we can actually be safe is if we can be with ourselves, if we understand how to be quiet with ourselves, if we understand how to be still with ourselves, because then you can be safe in any type of environment around anybody.
Yeah.
That's how you're really safe. Doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, there are mitigating circumstances in the 3D world when you have to interact with other human beings who may or may not be stable, obviously. But when you understand stillness and how to observe your mind, and when you can sit with yourself,
Hmm.
it's a whole game changer. Zen Buddhism is not complicated, but it's the hardest type of work
Mm.
of observation. And I loved it because I'm sort of, I mean, I'm a Taurus. I love just grinding through things like hard work. Uh, when I finally like get inspired and sink my teeth into a project, I'm just like, no, I'm gonna finish this. Don't care how long it takes. I'm gonna make sure I finish this. And especially if it's worthwhile, like if it's satisfying. I mean, Tauruses, we love supporting people, which is like, why like you and I work together so well, is because you have such a sharp mind and are able to understand concepts so well and
Well,
integrate.
and not only are we aware of our shadow and how synergistic it could be because we don't allow it to be.
That's right.
Mm. So, okay, I had a point where I was going
We've
with that,
learned the
but we've learned the
physical
physical. Yeah.
preamble
Hmm.
to our triggers.
Yeah.
So this is why having a physical practice, having a practice of observation is so important, because what happens is you eventually develop an ability to see the preamble, like the prologue in a book or the introduction in a movie. You begin to understand just by literally the foreshadowing of the script,
Hmm.
of like when you've seen enough horror movies, you know not to go by yourself without a flashlight down the dark hallway when there's 20 of you in a room with flashlights. You know not to go anywhere by yourself. It's like watching scary movie like a million times and going knowing the dialogue.
Hmm.
when you know a movie so well, like you can, oh, there's that pileated woodpecker. Oh my goodness. Okay, no, I'm gonna finish this sentence. So when you understand how to feel the preamble in your body, the
Hmm.
steps right before a trigger happens
Yeah.
in your mind,
Hmm.
in emotionally, mentally, emotionally, you can physically discern when your ego and your shadow and your id is going to try and hook you into a trigger. You can feel it in your body, you can feel it in your mind. It's the combination of the mental, emotional, and physical points of reference all worked together.
Hmm.
When you begin to understand that and feel that, then you understand that the triggers are illusions.
Hmm.
And yes, the id has been very effective at keeping us safe, keeping us out of trouble within, obvious situational realities. But you learn how to listen, how to be still, and it takes practice like anything else. And it's the same thing with shadow synergies. It's probably one of the greatest gifts that my ex-wife gave me because she and I were so synergistic. We had 6 month cycles, 6 months up, 6 months down, 6 months up, 6 months down. And I eventually accepted what was going on. And eventually, because I had never been on the receiving end of the kind of relationship that I was with her. I mean, very, she was very empathic. She was very, very smart, brilliant when it came to organizing, just absolutely like amazingly brilliant. We love the same cartoons and reading and like movies and stuff like that. But I did not understand the trauma that she was dealing with being uh, who she was, coming from the family that she was. And it took me years of learning, of going through the ups and downs over and over and over again to finally clue in to the synergy of our shadow and the fact that, and I'll never forget, like waking up in the middle of the night one night and realizing that I'd done to myself the same thing after we got married, that it was just a band-aid. We were in a happy place and we went from A to Z in the
Hmm.
space of about 3 months because we had gotten to the 6 month mark and we weren't crashing. We weren't going downward into a spiral.
Hmm.
And we got to the 8 month mark. We got to the 9 month mark and went, oh, wow, like maybe things have finally changed. We got to like the 10, 11th month mark. And I figured things had actually changed.
Hmm.
And then we decided to get married. And oh my God, did it all come back rushing in like a dam bursting.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, there was a story here that hadn't ever been experienced before. And Shadow, between my ex-wife and I, Shadow just jumped on it and launched us full force back into a downward spiral.
Hmm.
And we thought, and we had already like decided to get married, but the downward spiral was starting to happen. And a few months later, we were married, and we were just sort of at the middle of the downward spiral when we got married.
Hmm.
And then, 3 months later, I woke up one morning and I went, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Because I realized that the language and our speech patterns and our routines day in day out with work and coming home, like it was the same thing. And I went, holy smokes, even getting married did not stop anything. Getting married actually made things 10 times worse. Easy. Um, but it was understanding. It was just realizing, oh, I was like Shadow had done something new, had come at us from a completely different angle that we hadn't experienced before. So we didn't see it coming. And that's why I woke up 3 months later and I realized it just suddenly hit me. It's like, in that half awake, half other side stage space where I was just like, oh wow, it's the same thing. And my ex-wife was saying some of the same things that she always says when she's in a downward spiral. And I
Hmm.
went, but everything was good, right? In the
Hmm.
external world, everything was good. Like we were married, we were happy, things were going great in the external world, but our internal worlds were crashing hardcore.
Well, and that's how it is with shadow is that it will show you that you're doing a pattern in a completely different way.
Yep,
Same pattern, but it'll be a totally different set of circumstances.
yep,
And it's important in relationships friendships and groups and whatever you want to be involved in is that if you're actually going to do the shadow work you want to do the spiritual work, the inner work, whatever you want to call it, is that you have to have people in your life who are you're and you also have to be willing yourself to not only call yourself out but be okay have being called out
Yep. Yep.
and being okay to express to someone else when you're doing like following another pattern, because that's how you actually increase your communication, make
Yep.
your communication better. It's also how you actually grow. It's how you do the inner work.
Mhm.
But a lot of times people don't like being called out. They get really triggered when you're called out, when they're called out on a pattern.
Yep.
And that's one thing about our relationship that I really have enjoyed, as difficult as it was at the very beginning, but I really wanted something that was different. And I chose to be in something that was different. And
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
you were and I were friends for quite a long time
Mhm.
because I really didn't want the romantic part of it to cloud that kind of work.
Yeah, our ability to actually
Yeah,
grow as people
as people. I wanted to grow as a person. So I
outside of
wasn't
yeah.
interested at the time for to having that dynamic as also part of it. It was I liked that we had a friendship where we could talk about things and
Yeah.
call each other
Yeah.
out, and the number of times where, we had triggered each other and we took space, and we had to learn that taking space, like once you get triggered and you call the other person out, it does feel like a breakup. And
Oh
it's
yeah,
something
at
that I've
first, yeah.
actually talked about with my kids is that when you encounter this in a relationship, be wary that you're not going to react so hard that you throw it away.
Yep.
Because if you're able to sit with that person and talk out the trigger and
Yep.
see the pattern
Yep.
and the shadow and observe all of it and
Yep.
be able to talk about it and move through it so that you're both conscious of it, so that if you get triggered again, you can step into observation once
Yeah,
again.
you
And
make
you because you're going to get triggered over and over until it's done, until the energy of that pattern is
yep.
burnt out.
Yep.
So you have to be willing to feel as if you're breaking up because the energy is breaking up,
Yep.
because you're observing it, and by the act of observation it's changing. And that can feel physically disconcerting, mentally disconcerting, emotionally
And people, yeah,
disconcerting.
and
And
people,
then people are like, "Oh, I'm breaking up with you because blah blah blah." And it's like, if you just hold your horses, maybe that's not necessary.
that's right.
Now, if it's an abusive relationship, please, don't think that you can
Yeah.
change that. Or
And
if you think you're with a narcissist, don't think that you can change that by doing. We're talking about healthy communication here. We're
yep.
talking about being willing to say, "Hey, I watched you follow this pattern. Can
Yep.
we talk about this?" Or, "You've triggered me to feel angry and I need some space and then I want to talk about it."
And it's hard to I mean, it's actually next to impossible at first if you've never done this kind of work or if you've never had space to be understood this way.
Right. It's difficult.
It's very, very difficult. And if you don't have space at home, if you don't have a type of life where you give yourself time, where you have a regular routine of giving yourself time somehow, whether or not it's going for a swim, going for a walk, going to yoga class, or whatever, if you do not have the ability to give yourself time to decompress from the trigger and not wallow in it and not use it as fuel for your anger or for your hurt, then it'll be even more difficult to step into observation and to step beyond the pattern.
Hmm.
And I've watched a lot of people that I care about continue patterns even after I've had conversations with them or
Yeah.
had things blow up in my face because suddenly while we're having a conversation, the trigger rears its ugly head and the person is that I'm talking to is already like full blown out the door, gone and triggered.
Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
just like, they themselves like for some people they're so fragile or they're in a space where they feel so fragile about certain topics where they can't even talk about it. They can't even entertain the thought about having a conversation because they're so fragile or they're so hurt or they have such a wound up story about being hurt and being so fragile that even, I've had a couple of times where I remember going to university, a couple of my friends where I just say hi to them and they'd lose their shit on me. And I'd be like, standing there going, "Oh, what's going on?
Yeah.
I just said hi." And because the person's hurt has been bottled up for such a long time, it comes out at you.
Yeah.
And ironically, the reason why it comes out is because they know, their heart knows, their higher self knows that you can take it,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you will still love them, that you understand, and that you will see beyond their hurt and their pain, which is what they really want. But it's also hard when you're in that kind of space to even appreciate the fact that the person that you are yelling at or leaving or storming out on or whatever because you're triggered and you're hurt, you're feeling all of that pain. Uh, it's hard to see that the person that you're walking out on might actually be the person that loves you the most.
Yeah. Well, because it's always easier to be angry at people. I was there was I don't know if it was a meme or a video, but it was about with kids, like being a parent, is that your kids feel so secure with you and they know that you're going to love them no matter what, that they reject you.
Yep.
They outrightly reject you, and as a parent, it sucks.
Yep.
And it can happen at any stage, whether if they're adults or teenagers or toddlers, they will reject you in some way because they know that you love them and that you're going
Yeah.
to be there. But that's again, that's shadow. Shadow telling this person that, well, my parents don't understand me and they don't get this and they don't get that. So I think what we'd like to leave people with is that observation means that when you get emotionally triggered, especially if you're angry, don't react. It takes practice and it takes
Yep.
discipline not to react because our first instinct is to defend.
Yep.
But there really isn't anything to defend. Like, step back and observe, how does your body feel? What is your mind saying? What emotions are running through you, and observe it before you say a word. And if you need to, tell the person who triggered you, I'm triggered by what you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
I need some time. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you should do. Take some time so that
Absolutely.
your shadow doesn't take over.
So that you can actually give space to yourself. Yeah. So your shadow doesn't take over, so that you can observe what your shadow is trying to do. Any wallowing in hurt, pain, or anger is, I mean, it obviously when you are hurt and an injustice has been done, then yeah, like a certain amount of hurt is definitely definitely valid. Absolutely, we're not talking about dismissing or denying, feeling hurt or your feelings, but to understand, to take space, to have a moment of observation, to listen and to watch what your mind does, and to, I don't know, point at or identify the story, the main story, the main thread, whether or not it's anger or fear
Mhm.
or combinations of negative emotions or wallowing in those negative emotions. Um, I mean, there are some things I discovered with friends like years later where they were still like, I remember there's one person, I was volunteering at the folk festival and I was backstage and they came and found me because they still had a beef from like almost
Yeah,
20
I've
years
run
ago.
into
And I
that.
was just like,
Yeah.
but that's like from years ago. I'm not that person anymore. I don't even remember what happened.
Mhm.
It was so long ago. And like, oh, well, I remember this. And as they started talking about it, I realized that they thought I was somebody else in the story. I remembered the situation and I remembered being like a couple 100 feet away from the event, but I was the first person that rushed over to help them, so they thought that I had been right there.
Oh, interesting. Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Well, and observing your emotions are also where you become responsible.
yep.
Self responsibility for your emotions, that even if someone triggers you to feel angry, throwing anger back at them is you wanting them to be responsible for how you feel. You are responsible
And
for how you
yeah,
feel.
yeah,
And to express yourself in a way to them that is actually going to be constructive
yep,
means that they can't not be responsible for how you feel.
Yeah. Yep.
And if it's a person who is trying to make you angry, then you need to look at that, because if they're poking at you and trying to make you angry in some way,
Mm-mm.
or that's a pattern,
Mm-mm.
then by you observing it and not giving any power to it, you're breaking a pattern, and they're not going to know what to do with that.
That's right.
Anybody who really loves you will stop and let you have some space.
Yep.
And if they don't, and then they just don't know how to be responsible yet. And a lot of people don't know how. I mean, a lot. I mean, I can remember, that's how my ex-husband and I always had arguments, because we didn't know how to be responsible for our own feelings.
Mm.
And we were just angry about things. So it was like, well, I'm hurt, so I want you to hurt. And you just want the other person to hurt. And even with before I really learned how to do it, one of my children, like, we used to do that too, where it's like, well, you're hurting and I just want to be heard because I'm the parent, and so
Yep. Yep.
I get fed in would feed into it. And at some point you have to stop, and find a different way to communicate.
Yep.
But it takes practice. It takes practice, and it's practice of observation.
Yep. Yep.
So thank you for listening today. And once again, don't forget to like and subscribe, give
Sure.
us a 5-star review, share it, and just to let other people know. If you have any questions, we love it when we get comments. We got
Yeah.
comments on our
Yep.
one about grief and spirituality. And we have an upcoming workshop in June for the solstice. We're going to be doing Qigong and some channeling,
Yep.
and then there will be an in person and online component to that. We'll put the link in the description. So thanks again for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.